Said at that point then the woman stood up and the young girl stood up and they turned and walked away. He said as they walked away he noticed they both had cloven hoofed feet, rather like on a goat, and they trotted away or clip-clopped away. She was doing physical mediumship where she was manifesting dead sailors that were coming out of her seance cabinet and saying, I've gone down on the HMS Hood.
Have you known any, because you hear a lot of stories with the Ouija board, like bad spirits coming through as well. Because I mean, I've done a Ouija board a couple of times years ago, and we did it one time, and we got some decent, some good spirits through, and it was kind of all right, One come through, it was saying that it was right behind us, and there was a dent in the bed, and all, and it was that wasn't frightening at all. In fact, it was quite relaxing when we was doing it. And then we were telling this other friend about it, and they were skeptics, and they were saying, well, come along, we'll do a Ouija board and come and see for yourself, and we brought her around, and she was totally skeptical. She wasn't, she all thought it was nonsense. So we went on the Ouija board, and she had a thing on the glass and everything, and the spirit came through, and we're asking it questions, and it was answering but not making any sense. It wasn't spelling out any words that made any sense. So she was being a skeptic. She was going like, "What's the matter? Can't you spell like that?" And it went A, B, C, D. So that convinced her then that something is there, because she'd angered the spirit. She'd angered the spirit. And we were all like, "Whoa!" Because the glass was really packed. We couldn't stop the glass. We couldn't stop the glass. It was doing all the alphabet really strong, and then went straight to the middle. It was like, "Oh." I mean, she was crying, but it convinced her. So I was wondering if you've ever witnessed that kind of thing happening, where not so much bad spirits, but kind of annoying them, and you're getting that kind of negative.
No, I've never had the negative. Now the thing is, people say, "Oh, it's only bad spirits that come through." So I say to them, okay, bad spirits, you have nothing to do with it. Don't have anything to do. If you think it's bad spirits, so why are you going on Facebook talking to complete strangers then? Some of them could be bad spirits, but they're quite happy to talk to these people. So, I think with anything, you got to treat it with some sort of level of respect. But the people that ran this session, Heavenly Voices, they were advised by their spirits, if you like, to do what they call an opening and closing prayer. And it's like a declaration saying, okay, this is our business terms. We're going to only have good people come through that we love and respect, blah, 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 blah. And then we'll shut the door again. So in the same way that you might have, say, a business, and they might have someone on the reception desk or a security guard at the door, they're there to keep undesirables out of the business that might interfere with the process of their daily business. And the spirit guide on the other side is there to do a similar sort of job. They are the doorkeeper, if you like, for these seances. Now, you could start off as a bunch of teenagers and do it and get something bad through. I'm not saying that's never likely to happen. It possibly could, but that's because you've done it the wrong way, So that's why it's always a good idea to do these things gently and learn in a circle of older people that have done this sort of thing. But I suppose curiosity killed a cat, and people will do these things, and they might get their fingers burnt. But it's only a tool in itself, in the same way that, you have a TV, you can watch lovely programs on it, you can watch really horrific programs. You have the choice for the channel, you see. And if something does bad come through, then you just close the session down. You don't sort of hang around and keep it there. Like in the same way that if you got a bad person in your house, you don't sit there and entertain them for the rest of it. You show them the door, get out of my house. So it's the same sort of thing. Now, I spoke about the fact that someone is always there to meet you on the other side, to try and meet you anyway. And you talked about skeptics there. This is an interesting story, which kind of highlights a few things like that. I used to do tarot card readings many years ago. It's one of those tools that kind of got me into the mediumship, because I actually found that I was getting intuitive stuff coming through the mind rather than just through the tarot cards. So that's why I kind of went down the mediumship thing rather than just try and do fortune telling as such. But in the early days, people used to come to my house. I used to do readings for them. And then one day this old lady rang up and she said, "Can you come to me? I don't drive." And I thought, kind of groaned about it privately to myself, but I thought, well, okay, I'll do it. So I got her address, and this is before the internet. Took a bit of time and found it. And she lived in this small little kind of old people's bungalow somewhere. And I gave her the reading and sort of went through and told her things. Lasted about 40 minutes, and she goes, "That's very interesting. That's very accurate." But she goes, "There's one thing you haven't told me." And I said, "Well, what's that?" She goes, "You haven't told me about my husband." And I said, "Well, look, if I felt your husband around, I would have definitely said I feel your husband. But I said, I haven't found anything of your husband here." And she goes, "That's interesting." She goes, "Let me show you this." And she said, "In this bedroom, my husband spent the last year of his life ill on the bed. And he was so ill that you had to have an oxygen mask to keep helping him breathe." And she goes, "Every day that I try and straighten his pillows up, make him more comfortable." And one day she said she was lifting his pillows up, making him feel more comfortable. And he was saying, "I feel so ill. I feel so ill. I want to die." And she says, "But that, he actually just died in her arms." So, of course, she was shocked that her husband just slumped dead in her arms. And so she laid him back down. And she said she saw this vaporous mist coming out of his chest. She said it went up towards the ceiling, went across into the corner of the bedroom, and went into what you'd call the airing cupboard or the immersion heater cupboard or something. Went in there. Then she goes, "I told my doctor this," she said, 6 months later, but he didn't believe me. He just laughed at me. She goes, 6 months later, I woke up in the night, and she said, I saw," and she's an old lady, she said, "I saw a red Indian coming out the cupboard, and he was doing this. Like that, like scrabbling, trying to come out." She goes, "I could only see him from the waist upwards." And she said, "I could see the bone necklace around. She had some sort of war paint on him, but he had the full feathered headdress, bare chested, but she could only see him from the chest upwards, doing this." And she goes, "Behind him, she saw a man in the shadows. Couldn't quite clearly see who it was, but there's definitely a man behind him." And she said she thought she saw a man further, a third man behind that one with a bowler hat or something on. But she says, "I could definitely see the red Indian." And I said, "Well, what happened?" She says, "He was just trying to come out of the cupboard like that." But she says, "I'd see him every night. It wasn't just a one-off. She was waking up at 3 a.m. every morning and seeing this Indian coming out of the cupboard." So she said, "What do you think it is?" And I said, "Well, have you heard of spirit guides or anything like that?" And she goes, "No." This old lady had not got a clue what was happening. So I gently explained to her what I thought was likely happening. I said, "Look, when your husband died, the mist you saw coming out of his body, I think was his soul or spirit, if you like." And I said, "It went into that cupboard over there." I said, "I think your cupboard in the corner, because you saw something coming out of it 6 months later, I think it's like a revolving doorway in a hotel. You can go through it and you can come out of it." And I said, "It's acting like what they call a portal between this world and the next. And it becomes like a gateway." And I said, "Your husband was sucked into it and was taken somewhere, I suspect. And I bet your husband did not believe in any of this kind of stuff." And she says, "That's right. He thought it was a load of old rubbish." And I said, "But that's the key." I said, "He can't come back by himself to talk to you. So he's using this spirit guide, this Native American Indian, as like a bus driver, if you like. And he's going to bring him the journey back for you to speak to him. But obviously this spirit guide quite can't make full contact, but he's there." So the reason that you get these Native American spirit guides, and they tend to be Native American, not always, you can get monks, you can get Chinamen and things like that, maybe nuns as well. They tend to be spiritual people. The Native Americans are much more in tune with nature than the Western man, if you like, who was just totally immersed in materialism. The Native Americans were immersed in their environment. They talk about the Great Spirit, which was their version of God and stuff like that. So they're quite kind of in tune with that spiritual side of them. So that when they go to that side of life, they pass over, they're much more on a higher level of understanding of what's going on. And so they act as teachers and guides on the other side to people. So I suspect that because her husband, not having maybe much intelligence, thinking it's all a load of rubbish, finds himself dead, is taken to the spirit world by someone. And then he says, "I want to see my wife." And they said, "Well, look, we can perhaps get you back there, but we have to do this route. Your wife hasn't gone to see a medium, but we'll try and visually show her that you're here." And they brought him back through that portal of the immersion heater cupboard, the airing cupboard. And the spirit guy was trying to breathe the first one through. So she goes, "Well, what do I do about it?" I said, "Well, talk to the Spiritualist Association of Great Britain or the College of Psychic Studies, both in London. call them up on 192, which is direct inquiries. Call them up. I said, tell them exactly what you've told me and see if they can offer any further advice. And I left it with that. I just didn't know what happened to her. She's probably dead now because this is like 25 plus years ago. So she's probably gone to join him now. Now, the interesting thing about this cupboard is that in seances, what they call physical seances, which I mentioned earlier, they will have physical mediums. So there's people like Helen Duncan. In more modern times, you've got a guy called David Thompson from New Zealand, and other physical mediums. They will have what they call a seance cabinet. And in more modern times, I've seen mediums using what would be a toilet tent. If you think you're going camping, you see people with a toilet tent made of canvas on the campsite. More modern mediums have bought those and use them as what they call their cabinet. Now, in years gone past, they'd have a structure like a kind of box. The medium would sit there, maybe in the chair, often strapped up and taped up to kind of rule out fraud that it's not them that's doing it. And that would manifest, or the ectoplasm, if you like, would come out of the body, which is a kind of a substance that would form in a seance room. And it would come out the body of the medium in some way and solidify for a temporary amount of time into the form of a spirit of how they used to be on Earth. And I asked the medium, I said, why do you have to have these cabinets? And he said, it helps build up the energy. So the analogy that I tell people, there's a couple of analogies I use, is that, for instance, if you're going to make a cake, you take a cake mix, which is a liquid form, and you pour it into a cake tin. It's liquid. Now, you put it in the oven. But it's not going to turn into a cake, is it, until you shut that oven door, because the heat is escaping. The heat has to be kept at a certain temperature. So you shut the oven door, and that lets the heat and the temperature go up, and it changes the chemical form of that liquid into a more solid state, which becomes your cake. And another analogy is that imagine a TV. Now, in the old days, we had TVs that you used to put in the corner of a living room. And they had a valve, which is a vacuum, where they'd fire a photon in the back of the valve through this tube, hence the word tube, and it hit the screen from the inside. It'd run backwards and forwards across the TV screen. I'm doing it here across the camera so you can get it. And it'd be one little photon, but it'd race across there 50 times a second, so quick, or 50 hertz a second. So much so that it'd build up a trace of an image. Now, if you didn't have the sides of the TV here and the sides of there, that photon would run off into space and you'd never see it again. So you'd have to have this box-like structure to contain that image so that it gets traced across and build up the image of a person. So again, with that analogy, I suspect that these seance cabinets have to have that structure there for that energy to bounce around to build up that mixture, build up the ectoplasmic form or a visual form. And I suspect in the case of this lady's house with her airing cupboard, it was acting like a seance cabinet because it was a box-like structure where you could build up a form, and it could act as a portal as well, bringing these people in. And I've built up this theory now to the extent of that when people have said, oh, I saw a ghost, or it's my auntie so-and-so, I said, where were they? They said, oh, they were standing in the doorway. And again, it's the doorways, it's the cupboards in people's houses where these spirits are mostly seen, because I think they're using the natural structure of the building to help build up that visual image, you see. Where you can see ghosts go down roads and things like that. But I think it's the most common way of getting through is that they're going to use the environment in some way to help manifest their energy. And so if there's a structure there like a doorway, that's where they'll appear. If there isn't, they might use something like trees as a kind of a weak structure to bounce that energy around. But most commonly, doorways seem to be the way that they'll be seen in. And I remember on this haunted TV show program I saw many years ago, this guy was talking about the fact that he was working at his computer one day, but he said he felt a presence of someone watching him. And he said it was in the doorway behind him. But he said he looked around, there's no one there, but he felt strongly there was something standing in the doorway. And they got these ghost hunters in, researchers, paranormal researchers, and they was going around there with all their little EMF meters, gadgets and things like that. And they measured, and they said, yeah, there's a lot of electromagnetic energy in this house, particularly around the doorway, they said. They did not have an explanation why, but they said it's particularly around the doorway. Whereas I formulated this idea some years later with talking to people, I thought, there's something about these doorways that's helping this focus of energy build up, you see. So that's where I'm at with that hypothesis. It's not a proven fact or whatever, because I'm not a scientist, but I've just seen a pattern reoccurring over my investigations and research over the years.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. Does it you, Paul? I mean,
me too, yeah. I'm just curious about also, because I've had a near-death experience, and I just wondered, what's your take on reincarnation? Because obviously you can talk to people when they pass over. So what's the point of not the point, I mean, it's the wrong way to say it, but when does the process then go on to like reincarnation, or do they stay in one realm? What's your take on reincarnation and realms?
Okay. Well, reincarnation, I always thought it was a tin of funny tasting milk. But no. Yeah, reincarnation, it's an interesting one. There's some people that believe it and some people that don't. But I think it depends on the way you present it, because people automatically assume that you're going to reincarnate as a bird or a creature or something in the next life round. But I don't necessarily think that's the case. I've read lots of different books. And what I call channeled books, where that's a spirit guide that will speak through a medium and relate like the spiritual topics of like things like reincarnation. They'll tell you how it works. Firstly, there's the thing of simultaneous time. I don't know if that's something you've ever heard, have you? Yeah. Where everything happens at once. Yeah. So basically there is no future, there's no past, there's only the eternal present. But it appears to us there seems to be a history, there seems to be a past and a future, and it took me a long time to try and understand that. And I worked out an analogy to help people understand it. I said, if you remember an old 78 record, your LP that you used to buy your favorite band from Woolworths or something all those years ago, you get the LP out, and you would see, if you held it up at a certain thing or the light of the window, you'd see the individual tracks or the songs on the LP. And you think, oh, yeah, there's 5 tracks going across there, and there's a little thin black gap where there's silence between the songs. And then you'd flip it over and you'd see the other songs on the other side. Now, in order for you to play those songs, you'd have to put it onto a record player and put the stylus through it, and it'd go through the groove of that album, slowly playing the song round and round. Then you get to the silence where there's no music, and then you get to the next song. So I envisage that that's a bit like past lives or reincarnation, if you like, that one song is there, that's one life. Then you got the black groovy gap where there's silence, that's between lives. And then you go on to the next song. So in order to experience those songs, you have to be on that groove, on the needle of the stylus, to experience it in a linear fashion. But you take it off the record player and hold it back up to like, you see all those songs at the same time. You see, it's just a different way of looking at it. Yeah. But yeah, so anyway, I don't play my Black Lace records anymore. With that in mind, this spirit guide called Seth, who came through the medium of Jane Roberts, he said that, yes, people do reincarnate, but you will get them like a whole village might reincarnate as a group. Like they might be part of what they call a group soul. So in the same way that you might have a pop group of different musicians playing a band together, you might get a whole load of people that will perform roles in this lifetime together. So you might have, say, a husband and wife, the kids or whatever, as a group soul or something like that. They're individual people, but they're almost like a band. And I'll say, I'll be the wife in this lifetime, you be my husband, and you be my kids. But in the next lifetime, they'll all reincarnate again. And the wife becomes the husband becomes the wife, and the sister becomes the brother. And they'll experience life again. And they'll all be playing out their different challenges to each other. I'll be the awkward git, you'll be the nice one, or whatever like that, like roles in a film. But they'll all do it from different viewpoints and in different time zones. So I do think there is a sort of thing as reincarnation. Some people don't agree on the idea of it being simultaneous time all at once, but that's fine. It makes no odds to me. You know, if you want to sort of think of it as one lifetime after another, and you can go back in time and perhaps find evidence that you lived in previous lifetimes. There's certainly evidence of kids that remember being like pilots on aircraft in the war and stuff, and they remember how the instruments were laid out, and they'll draw pictures of the aeroplanes and stuff like that. Then after about maybe 5 or 6 years, those memories will fall away and they get immersed in this lifetime. And normally the lifetime they're recounting is not long past. Like there's lots of kids that have been around that talk about previous lifetimes being in the Second World War, which means that they've only had maybe a gap of 40 to 50, 60 years between lives. Whereas other times between lifetimes, you can have gaps maybe 200 or 300 years, you see. And that's where you're less likely to have memories of a previous lifetime unless you have something like hypnosis to go back. But there's cases where people, I mean, I met a guy who was probably about 60 at the time. He said, I remember a lifetime being a German Panzer tank driver in the Second World War, which I thought was quite interesting. So, yeah, I do believe these previous lives exist. There seems to be quite a lot of evidence for it. And the point that I get to is that when you're in the spirit world, you're all up there as a family. There's your great auntie, your grandmother, and things like that. It gets to a point where all these other souls are joining you. At what point does great auntie or whoever then go off to do another life and you never see her again? You know, that's the bit that kind of puzzles me, because there's got to be a break-off point where those people said, yeah, now I'm going to go on now to my next lifetime, so you won't ever see me. So it's almost like a second death. So you get reunited with your grandfather in the spirit world, but at some point they said, now it's time for me to reincarnate. Or do you then all reincarnate together? I don't know how that bit works, but that's where you chisel away and get to the finer points of it when you break it down like that. And you, of course, there's more questions to ask. But on a general thing, yes, I do think there is reincarnation.
I agree. Do you think as well? I mean, I've heard people say that every time you're reincarnated, that your awareness is raised, your consciousness is raised as you learn like new lessons each life. You're learning more, and your consciousness is raised each time. I don't know if you put any emphasis on that, or it's just something that I've heard reading stuff. I don't know if.
Yeah, that seems to be the kind of thing for it. I mean, again, it's a bit like going to school, and you do a whole year at one level, and then you have a break, summer holidays, and then you go back in September and you go to the next level, the next year up, and again you go up to that next level with your mates that are in the previous year, so they're all your familiar friends around you, but you're learning different lessons, and that again is a good analogy. That you reincarnate with those same people. You might forget who they are. And they're doing it slightly, but you're all learning a similar lesson. And the fact that you kind of know them, it perhaps helps, because like in the same way that you will help your mate with his times table at school and they'll help you do a drawing for your project, in that lifetime, in the next time, they'll probably be there to help you because they've got that ability. So they're there to support you and you're there to support them. That's a general kind of rule of thumb. But obviously each lifetime is perhaps different for each individual because they all come through with their different challenges. But the idea is that you keep doing these lifetimes, you become wiser and much more spiritual and advanced and things, because that's the name of the game. But where do you end up? I don't know.
And whether it's just different dimensions, you keep going. It's difficult, isn't it, to know. From our perspective, you know, here on Earth, you know, to gain, you can gain enough, you know, so much knowledge, and then do we gain more as we go onto other lives and other realms? I mean, it's hard to, you know, it's these are the questions, aren't they? Big questions that need to.
Ponder. Yeah. I mean, it's not just humankind that's inhabiting the spirit realm. I think there's actually different, like you say, different dimensions where there's other beings that are not necessarily related to the humans, and so when you die you won't necessarily these other beings. I mean, I remember talking to this guy on a plane. I was flying to Spain for a holiday with my family, and my son, who was very young at the time, he was sitting by the window. I was in the middle seat, and this guy got on the plane. He was dark-skinned, and I assumed he was Spanish because we're all flying back to Spain, and there was loads of Spanish people flying back to Spain on this EasyJet flight. And he got chatting to me, but it turned out, he said, I'm from Iran, but I prefer to call it Persia, but I live in London now, and I'm an architect, you know, and we got chatting. He said, what do you do? And I said, well, at the time, I ran this fairy museum in the Orkney Islands, and I did all the drawings and stuff for it. So I had a few pictures on my camera, and I was just showing the drawings I did, and I started talking about a few of the weird fairy stories that I had heard, and that made him open up. Now, he would have never said this, what I'm about to tell you, would have never said this to anyone, but it's because he felt he could trust me. He felt that someone to tell this story to, because I said there's a lot more to this world than we know of, and I said I think scientists are just getting their hand on the door handle of this reality. We haven't opened the door fully yet. We're just literally about to open this door, but we haven't got it there. And he says, yes, I agree with you. And then he related the following story to me, which I'm sure will be of interest to you guys and your listeners. What it was, he said that, and he didn't really give a year, but based on the fact that at the time he was 47, I think this might have been somewhere in the 1980s. He said, I was a young conscript in the Iranian army. And he said, I was there with my army colleague and we had to patrol the streets somewhere in Iran. And he said that there's a lot of noise coming from next door. I don't know what's going on there. You hear a few bangs and things like that. It's not spirits. It's someone laying cables or something by the sounds of it. But anyway, he said that he was patrolling the streets one night in Iran and a sandstorm kicked up, which is very common in that part of the world. So he said, let's seek shelter. And they found this mosque. So in a mosque, you have to take your shoes off because it's a way of doing things in there. So he said they both took their shoes off. And this guy, I'll call him Hussein. I can't remember his name now, but I call him Hussein for the purposes of relating the story. He said to his army buddy, look, you sleep first. And after an hour, I'll have a sleep, but I'll wake you up and we'll take it in turns. So his mate fell asleep. And then Hussein sat with his back against the wall, sitting next to him, holding a gun. And he said, no matter how hard he tried, he kept falling asleep and he kept drifting off. He said it happened 3 times that he drifted off and woke himself up. No, I've got to stay awake. I've got to stay awake. He said on the 3rd time he drifted off and this time he woke up and he said suddenly, he said there was this woman crouching down by his feet, looking at his feet. And he said there was a young girl next to the woman. He put about 9, 10, 11 years old, crouching down as well, looking at his friend's feet. And they were just staring at the feet with a curiosity sort of thing. And he thought, where the hell have these people come from? You know, what's happening? So he said he tried to wake up his friend by pressing his elbow onto his friend's chest. And he said no matter how hard he pressed his elbow, he said his friend wasn't waking up. So he said, I didn't like this. He said, I thought I was going to get out of there. I didn't like the feeling of this. So he said he started to wrap the strap of the gun that he had around his arm. So he said that so when he ran away, the gun wouldn't swing about. I thought, you're the fellow with the gun here, you know. Surely you got control of the situation. But he was going to run away from a girl and a woman. I don't know why, you know. But he said, as soon as I started to wrap the strap around my hand, the movement of it must have made the woman look up because he said she looked up at me. He says, as soon as I looked at her and I looked at her in the eyes and she looked at me in the eyes, says, I knew that she was not from this world. Something just clicked and I knew that she was not from this world. And he said at that point then the woman stood up and the young girl stood up and they turned and walked away. And he said as they walked away, he noticed they both had cloven hoofed feet, rather like on a goat. And they trotted away or clip-clopped away. And he said they vanished into the wall.
Wow.
So you think, what the hell was that about? And I said to him, wow, that's absolutely fascinating. When he told me that, I had a shiver go up and down my spine. And I thought, that's really interesting because obviously they were staring at his feet. So to them, the human feet was the odd things to look at and behold. Because they'd never seen these feet before. Or maybe they were aware. But this is what I'm talking about, the fact that we are being watched. And these people were watching Hussein and his friend. They were human to an extent, but they had a different evolutionary path. Can't say the word. Evolutionary path. That they somehow, for whatever reason, developed these cloven hoofed feet as part of their makeup. And they existed or appear to exist in a separate level of reality. So they weren't spirits of Auntie Ethel and Uncle Bob, human spirits. These were different people in their own realm. But for some reason, they'd come through in a mosque, a holy place where maybe you do a lot of prayers. Maybe that sets up the energy. I don't know. And they come through and observed them. Which also leads on quite nicely to another story. Again, not quite Auntie Bob or Auntie Ethel visiting you from the spirit realm, but it's to do with this time with a Christian church. And many years ago, I used to work at this broadcasting company, and there was a guy from the West Indies who was a security guard that worked there, and his name was Owen. And he said that when he lived in the West Indies, and I think, but I'm not 100% certain, it was the island of St. Lucia, but I can't be sure on that, but it doesn't really matter. I'll say it's the island of St. Lucia just for the sake of argument, that he said, I was in a bar and I used to drink with my pals in this bar, and we'd take the same route home every night. He said one day he was walking back with his mate, and they had a few drinks, so they weren't absolutely 100% sober, but you don't hallucinate when you have drinks anyway. You just get a bit loose with your tongue maybe and a bit wibbly wobbly. But he said he walked home with his mate, and as they walked up the hill, their normal route home, they go past a church. He said on this particular night, as they were walking through, he said they looked up at the church, and this is what struck me, because this is what got me interested in the story. I overheard him talking to a girl at work in the canteen. He said she was as white as that fridge freezer, and he was pointing to a fridge freezer in the staff canteen. So I said, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? Tell me, what's this? So this is what he related to me. He says, this was a woman, he said, that was sitting on the church roof. And I laughed. I said, what's a woman doing sitting on the church roof for? And he said, she was no ordinary woman. He said, this woman was at least 50 foot tall. I went, what? He said, yeah, 50 foot tall, sitting on the church roof, wow. Legs on either side of the church roof. And he said she had white skin, long white hair, long pale dress on. And you imagine an adult, sitting on a doll's house, either side, fairly uncomfortable, but that's what it looked like, I'd imagine. But she was at least 50 foot tall. And I always say this, no wonder they're always trying to raise money for the church roofs, because you've got these bloody giant women sitting on them all the time. So his friend who was with him was crouching behind a gravestone. So Owen said, do you see this too? He verified it, that, it wasn't just him seeing it. He goes, yeah, I can see it too, his friend said. And he was absolutely in fear, hiding behind a gravestone. So Owen, being the brave of the two, he said he picked up this rock, and he said he threw it at this 50-foot woman on the church roof. And I said, well, what happened? He said, well, it went straight through her. He said, but then she stood up. It obviously pissed her off a little bit. Not a good idea to throw rocks at 50-foot women. So he said that she stepped off the church and started to walk towards them as this 50-foot tall woman. Bloody scary, if you ask me. But I said, well, then what happened? He said that she shrunk in size. As she got close to them, she sort of shrunk in size to the size of a normal human, and then just sort of dissipated into the ground and vanished. And that was that. Now, again, this is a weird thing happening on a holy building, a bit like the mosque, but this is a Christian church, but they're appearing there. So what's going on? And they're not from the spirit realm that we would think of, like the afterlife. They seem to be something exceedingly different. Now, I have heard that churches, things like that, are built on ley lines, where ley lines intersect. I don't know how true that is, but they talk about energy and ley lines and stuff like that. And then I have heard that there's what they call guardians or goddesses or something that protects these sacred areas where these ley lines might be for energy, and they're like keepers of it. They protect it. And then later on, someone builds a church on it. So maybe, it's only a very loose maybe, because I can't prove it. Again, it's a hypothesis or a theory, that this goddess type lady, huge 50-foot woman, was there protecting the church. Maybe she picks up energy from the ley lines. I don't know. She recharges her batteries. Who knows? But she was sitting there. She wasn't obviously there every time they passed the church. She just happened to be there, sitting on that church for that particular night that she was spotted.
Wow.
I think that was a story. But I think it goes to show as well that a lot of people have had these experiences, and I bet there's we know there's going to be a lot of people who will keep it to themselves because of the fear of ridicule and and just being laughed at. So how many people out there have had these experiences but just can't find the outlet to talk about it. That was quite something. So I can imagine without that guy in the plane, it must have been great to open up to you. Knowing that he was open-minded once he'd got talking to you. There must be a lot of people out there that.
Well, that's it. Yeah. I mean, I've done talks, as I said earlier. I've done talks around the country, and I was relating these kind of stories at the Probe conference, which is no more apparently now, which is in Lytham St Anne's near Blackpool. First and ever, only time I ever went to the Probe was about 3 years ago now. So I was telling these stories to the people there, and this lady came up to me after I told her the cloven-hooved women story in the mosque. She came up to me and she goes, "I'm so glad you talked about that." And I said, "Why is that?" And she goes, "Well, I had an experience in hospital where I saw something similar." I said, "Really?" She said that she was at this hospital. She had just given birth to a baby, which unfortunately was stillborn when it was born. So they had put her in this, like, I don't know what they call the room, a mourning room, a recovery room, or, you know, prayer room or something, where she could sit and be by herself. And they put the dead body of the baby in a cot next to her. And she says she's sitting on the bed, crying her heart out, thinking, how can I be strong for my family? I've got a dead baby and I've got to be strong for my family. And I'm going through this really terrible experience. And then she said, all of a sudden, the door opened of this room. She said, in March, and this sounds absolutely crazy, in March, 5 or 6 mini centaur beings. So they got like the body of a horse. Very small, though. They're not like huge beings. I think she said something like 1.5 foot high. So if you think like little prehistoric pony type things from Valley of the Gwangi or whatever the film was, you know, the Ray Harryhausen film, they had a little miniature prehistoric horse. I'd imagine it's something that height, but it had a humanish body. But she said they weren't pretty. They were really ugly. And she said 2 of them came up and looked at her. And she said 2 of them went over to the cot where the dead baby was and just stared in at the cot at the baby. And she said they were there for some while and then they went. Now, she didn't say how they went. She didn't say they vanished. They didn't go back out the door. She just sort of said they weren't there anymore. But she said it had some sort of positive healing effect on her because she suddenly felt a lot better after that experience. So she said, again, like you're saying, there must be secrets these people harbor themselves thinking they're crazy. But because I told that story at the program, she felt it was a safe outlet to come and tell me that story and get it off her chest. Now, you can say, oh, that's a hallucination. You were given drugs by the hospital, whatever. Maybe so. But she had to relate the story to me. And if it wasn't drugs, you know, for instance, she might have had that experience and thought, oh, yeah, they gave me a lot of gas and air and I was given morphine to recover from it. It must have been the drugs. But no, she absolutely still questioned it all those years later to then sort of get it off her chest to me, you see. So this is why I don't think it was drugs. I think it was possibly something she experienced. Now, whether it was absolutely there in the room or it's some psychological trick of the mind, we'll never know. But she related it as a story that she had to get off her chest to me, which in the end, it was beneficial. It actually helped her.
Right. I mean, they say with, I mean, I know you mentioned she went on drugs, but even some say certain drugs, it's not simply just hallucination. It could be a means to access them kind of dimensions or, you know, access the spirit world a little bit more. Maybe it's a gateway, you know, these kind of drugs can be little gateways to that. You know, I've heard that. I mean, a lot of studies now are being put out there to say that this is the case, you know. So even if people are saying, oh, yeah, you're on drugs, well, yes, but it could well still mean that what you are seeing is what you're seeing. It still applies. So, you know, but, you know, but to hear an account where they're stone cold sober is just incredible, isn't it? It's just absolutely
amazing.
I mean,
going back to the physical mediumship, I mean, I've been reading some amazing accounts. There was, who was it now? I think it was the medium Helen Duncan. I don't know if you've ever heard of her.
Oh, yes. Yeah. We did an interview with Ben on her.
Okay. So you kind of know the story then. That for those that don't know, that Helen Duncan was a wartime medium. She came from Scotland, but she did a lot of her demonstrations down in the Portsmouth area. And to cut a long story short, she was doing physical mediumship where she was manifesting dead sailors that were coming out of her seance cabinet and saying, I've gone down on the HMS Hood or the HMS, whatever it was. And basically the Ministry of Defence, they won't call the Ministry of Defence, the War Ministry, I think they were called, or the Navy, were basically trying to keep all this hush-hush because they didn't want the British population to know that they were losing ships. And yet here was Helen Duncan bringing back sailors that had recently died on these ships, and the word was getting out. So there was a conspiracy or a collusion of people to try and get her put away, basically. And she was tried under the Witchcraft Act. Now, that's that story aside. She did come out of prison after the war, and she carried on demonstrating. And if you go to her website, there was some interesting letters that have been put up there by members of her family that still live and try and clear her name. And people have testified that they said, yeah, I've been in Helen Duncan's seances, and I saw a piper, a Highland piper, you know, the guy that plays the bagpipes, the big sort of feathery hat, coming out of a seance room, talking in a Scots accent, playing the pipes, and he even brought a Highland pony out with him. And he said it was nodding its head like ponies do. So this is someone that's totally stone cold sober, and they're witnessing that. And you think, well, if Helen Duncan's fake, how does she get a Highland piper complete with bagpipes and a Highland pony coming out of this small little seance cabinet in a room? And then it's got to disappear after that, because she used to be accused of manifesting these spirits of having two stomachs, and saying that she was swallowing cheesecloth and she'd hide it in one stomach and bring it all up, and somehow it'd shape itself into the person, which is highly, you know, and skeptics always go with this thing of Occam's razor.
Oh, yeah.
Go with the simplest explanation. Well, that's much more hard to believe, that you got two stomachs and you're somehow manifesting it or wrapping it up into a shape of a person. And, you know, and then you've got to wrap it up into the shape of a nodding Highland pony that looks completely unrealistic, made out of cheesecloth. It doesn't, you know, it just doesn't ring true for me. No. And the Occam's razor thing, that it's much more easier to believe that there is this psychic world that can do this sort of thing and manifest these spirits in some way that we don't fully understand the science of it. Fortunately, there are scientists out there now that are looking into it. I mean, years ago, people would wash their hands of it. But there have been scientists over the years like Sir Oliver Lodge and people like that. And in more modern times, there's Gary Schwartz in America, who's done lots of experiments with spirit guides and angels as well in his laboratory, and he sort of seems to register on scopes and things like that. So he asks them to do certain things and says, right, I want you to do something, and this spirit guide will do it. And yet there's no one there, but he's got a little trick up his sleeve. And I don't quite understand the whole thing, but it's apparently when astronomers are trying to work out if there's a planet in a certain solar system that's so far away, they look at the star, and when the star dims, that means to them that there's a planet moving in front of it. Okay, so that's how they can, even though they can't see the planet, they know the planet is there in that solar system because it moves in front of it and blocks it out momentarily. So he takes that idea and he asks the spirit to block out certain lights in the room, and it'll block out certain lights in the room. And basically, to cut a long story short, that's how he knows there's spirits there. And they have an intelligence, and sometimes they take over the experiment and push it in the way that they want to do it as well. And there's been cases of Marco Bacelli, I think his name is. He's passed on himself now, but he was an Italian medium, a physical medium, that had this old wartime radio where you would hear the voices of the dead come through and speak. And they'd be speaking in their Italian language to all the people that were in the room. And yet when English people came over and visited him, suddenly the Italian voices would stop and English people would start talking through to the English people. And there was one particular scientist who was witnessing this, thinking, okay, this is fraud. I'm going to investigate this further. He unplugged it from the wall, this radio. He took out the valves. So it's a dead machine. It's not going to work. And yet still the voices came through it. And he put his ear up to the speaker and he could hear the voices still coming through, talking to their relatives in the room. And it was all unplugged from the wall. So crazy. But that's what's being claimed to have happened.
That's incredible. I don't know if you've got any more questions, but I want to put to you, Neil, how do you deal with skeptics and more on the skeptic thing? Because I mean, obviously in what you do and what we do as well, Paul, we do come across them a lot, and sometimes can be quite draining. How do you deal with skeptics who like just will not accept any of this? Do you just let it be, or do you just
you can debate with them, but at the end of the day, most of them are so closed-minded that we'll say, well, look, okay, you come along to this demonstration of mediumship, then they won't go to it. So the thing is, if they're not going to go to these things and research them for themselves, they'll always dismiss it. They're always the experts on it, but they never actually go to these things. So you say, okay, if you know so much about it, tell me all about it. But they don't know enough about it. Yet they're somehow the experts on it and how it's done. But they've never been to any demonstration of clairvoyance. And I have the same thing with people that call themselves flat earthers. They say, "Oh, the Earth's flat." You know, you measure this building, measure that, but when it proves it's all flat, you shouldn't see this, you shouldn't see that. And I say, tell me, what telescope do you have? And there's no answer.
Yeah.
And I say, well, the reason I'm asking you a telescope, have you observed other planets in our solar system? Have you looked at the moon through the solar system? Because when you've, like me, looked at the moon through the solar system and seen a curvature on the moon, or you've seen other planets like Jupiter and Saturn, you've seen a curvature on them as well, or Mars, or say a phase of the moon of the planet Venus, you see it in a phase, which means it's curved. You've seen that with your own eyes. I'd like to know what forces in the galaxy or the universe or the solar system is making them spherical, but making this planet that we're on flat. What's the difference? You know, if we're all subject to the same vacuum, the same gravitational forces or whatever, then surely we've got to be on a sphere as well. And even the Germans, before NASA came along, even the Germans were sending up V2 rockets.
This camera, part of a flying laboratory, is recovered by Clyde Holliday of Johns Hopkins, who prepared it for its trip to the upper stratosphere. Rivaling the fantastic imagination of Jules Verne, the camera brought back a record of a flight into the heavens of a captured German V2 rocket. At White Sands, New Mexico, the huge missile takes off. Air Force pictures show the rocket in flight, and the flying camera automatically takes over. The huge projectile drops the Earth behind at the tremendous speed of 4,000 feet per second. The rotation of the rocket causes the planet to spin before the lens, and the camera photographs the Earth 65 miles straight down. The horizon, 720 miles away, and the curvature of the Earth are astonishingly apparent in this still picture from the film. An observer in the rocket could have seen San Diego, Salt Lake City, Kansas City, and San Antonio. Approximately 1,600,000 square miles of the Earth's surface was revealed. The rocket reached the 65-mile height in 3 minutes. This giant engine of destruction, designed by Hitler to annihilate allied nations, now serves the worthy cause of peacetime research.
With cameras and looking down on a curved planet. So it wasn't a NASA conspiracy on that one, at least.
I agree with that. Yeah.
With the flat earthers, I say just get a telescope. Things like that. So with the same thing, it's only you can only do it. At the end of the day, it's down to personal experience, and that's where it comes to. Go out there and research it yourself. And that's what I say to the skeptics.
Yeah, I agree with that. Have you got any more questions, Paul, before we wrap up?
Yeah, the things I'm interested in to know about is Neil's thoughts about archons.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I don't know too much about archons, but I know a man who can.
Okay, right.
That's a man by the name of Mr. Ronald Kinsella. Okay.
Yeah, I know.
I've heard it, yeah.
He's also a twin, Philip Kinsella as well. I think you should get him on your program because they got lots of things to talk about. One of them, Ronnie, has done a brilliant presentation on the archons. He's got lots of interesting stories to tell, but so has Philip. And Philip is a medium, but he's also a UFO researcher. And has experienced UFOs with his brother as well. So they'd be a great team to interview as well. So and I can give you their details after this. But he would be the man to ask about archons. I've heard of them. I don't want to say what I think they are because I don't know myself. It's not an area of my expertise, but I know Ronnie would be able to give some viewpoints on that at least.
That's brilliant. Yeah. Well, have that noted down, definitely.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, it's been great. Thank you very much, Neil. We could have gone on a lot more and with a lot more discussion and all the accounts that you have, all the interesting accounts. It's probably loads, that they'd be so interesting to have on our show and talk about and discuss. So we'd love to have you back if that's
Absolutely.
okay.
Be delighted to come on.
Because it's been a real pleasure, and I just look forward to the next chat. Really, So, but thank you very much, Neil. Thank you very much for your time and everything.
It's a good job that we're doing this in the daylight because you don't want to hear these stories just before you go to bed.
That's a good point. Yes, I like that. That's true. Yeah. So thank you, Neil, and thank you for your time. And we'll organise a second one soon.
Absolutely.
If that's all good.
No problem at all. All right, guys.
Brilliant.
Okay,
Thanks a
Neil.
lot. Neil. Thank
Cheers
you.
now.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.